My name is Delia Rooker. I am 44 years old, and I have taken in hems on Bergen Street for 16 years. I measure things for a living. I have never once trusted a number somebody told me without laying my own tape on it first. That habit is the only reason you are hearing this story instead of a different one. At 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 3 weeks after we buried Vernon Halloway, his lawyer read the will out loud. A conference room above the hardware store in Brant Falls, Minnesota. 11 of us around the table. When he got to the part about the land, my mother-in-law turned in her chair so the whole table could hear her, and she said, "You came with a suitcase, Delia. You can leave with one." 19 years of Thanksgivings in that house folded down small enough to fit inside one sentence. I did not argue. I have never once won an argument with that woman, and I have stopped entering them. I waited until the room was quiet again, and I said, "Mr. Tannen, could I see the survey that goes with the legal description?" He said he would get back to me. He got back to me 11 days later. By then, he had already telephoned the county surveyor's office and heard something he plainly did not want to be the one to repeat. Welcome back to Thistlegate Estate, where the overlooked finally claim what's theirs. Brant Falls is a town of about 1,900 people in Kettle County, and if you have ever lived in one, you already know how it works. There is a hardware store, a Lutheran church with a basement that hosts everything that matters, a bar, and one street where the businesses are. Mine is on that street. Rooker Alterations, between the insurance office and a place that sells snowmobile parts. 16 years. I have hemmed prom dresses on girls who came back later with wedding dresses and came back after that with a christening gown that needed the sleeves taken in. I have let out more funeral suits than I can count, because grief and 40 years both go straight to a man's middle. I know the measurements of half this township better than their own doctors do. My mother taught me. Her people came up from Texas in the 60s to work the beet harvest in the Red River Valley the way a lot of families did, and unlike most of them, they stayed. She sewed in a trailer in Moorhead with the machine on an ironing board. When she died, she left me her shears and a tomato pincushion with the strawberry still on the string, and I use both of them every working day. She could look at a person across a church and tell you their inseam. I inherited that and nothing else. For a long time, I thought that was a small inheritance. I married Ward Halloway 19 years ago. Ward is a good-natured man who has spent his whole life not making waves in a family where the waves are the point. We have a daughter, Iris, who is 16 and taller than both of us, and who has her grandmother's chin, which is a thing I try not to think about. The Halloways have the orchard, 22 acres on County Road 9 Apples, mostly a cider barn, and a carved sign at the end of the drive that says Halloway Orchard Est, 1938. Vernon's father planted the first block of trees. Every wedding, funeral, graduation, and 4th of July in that family for 4 generations has happened under those trees, and Marguerite has run all of them. Marguerite has a way of dividing people that took me about 6 years to hear. There are Halloways who grew in, and there are people who married in. She has never once said it unkindly. In her mouth, it is a category the same as sweet apples and cooking apples. Now, one small thing about my house, and then I will get on with it. Ward and I live a quarter-mile down County Road 9 from the Orchard Drive in a story and a half with a shop attached where I work. My sewing room window faces west, straight across a flat field. For the first 8 years I worked in that room, the February wind came off that field hard enough to make the glass cold enough to feel from 4 feet away. So, 11 years ago, I planted a windbreak. 31 white spruce, 3 feet high, when they went in along the far side of the gravel 2-track that runs up from the county road to the orchard. I planted those trees for a window. I want that on the record before anybody decides I was clever. The other thing about that 2-track is the low spot. About 400 feet up from the county road, it dips and crosses an old drainage run. There is a culvert under it. Every single spring when the frost comes, out that low spot washes, and somebody has to get it patched before the pickers come in September. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, by the way. I like knowing whose kitchen this is playing in while I tell it. The first thing I want you to understand is that nobody in that family ever slammed a door on me. It was never like that. It was smaller, and it took 19 years. I am the one who takes the photograph. Every 4th of July, the whole family lines up on the steps of the cider barn, and every year somebody hands me the camera. Not once did anybody say, "Delia, get in here." Somebody would hold out the phone, and I would take it because, what else do you do? Then I would say, 1, 2, and they would all say cheese. There are 200 photographs of that family on the wall of that barn, and I am in 4 of them, all 4 by accident. For 19 years, Marguerite introduced me at church, at the fair, at the co-op annual meeting, as Ward's wife. Not by my name. She knows my name. She has said it plenty when she needed something hemmed. There is a Christmas letter, too. Marguerite has written one every year since 1988 and mails about 90 of them. Everybody gets a line. Bree and her husband get a line with both their names in it. The cousins in Hibbing get a line. Vernon's brother in Arizona gets a line, and he had not spoken to Vernon since 1994. Ours reads the same way every year. Ward and his family are doing well. Iris was 9 the year she read one off her grandmother's refrigerator and asked me why she did not have a name in it. I told her the letter was long, and Grandma had a lot of people to fit in. That is the first lie I ever told my daughter. I told it standing in that kitchen with a dish towel in my hand. That is rung 1, and if that were all of it, I would not be telling you anything. Every family has a little of that. Stay with me. Rung 2 was the dress. Bree got married 9 years ago, and she bought a gown online that came in 2 sizes too big through the bust and about 5 inches too long. She cried in my shop. I told her to stop crying and stand still. I did 3 fittings on that dress. I took the bodice apart and rebuilt it. I put a French seam in a place a French seam had no business being. I hand-finished a hem on 22 feet of horsehair braid over 4 nights after I closed. I did not charge her $1 because she is my husband's sister, and that is what you do. At the reception in the barn, Marguerite got the microphone to thank people. She thanked the caterer. She thanked the girl who did the flowers. And then she said, "And doesn't Bree look like a picture that's a bridal shop up in Duluth? They did wonders." I was standing 11 feet away, holding a tray of bars. Lemon bars. I had made them that morning. 6 pans of them, because Marguerite had called on Thursday and asked if I would. I said yes. I said yes to everything for 19 years. Bree knew. Bree looked right at me across that barn, and she made a little face like, "Oh, well," and she went back to her champagne. If you have ever done a thing for free for people who thanked somebody else for it out loud while you stood there holding a tray, you know it is not about the money. It never was about the money. It is that they got to decide what happened, and what happened was not what happened. Comment "married in" if your family has ever had a word for you. There is a small piece of that night I want to put down here because it will matter later. Late on, out by the drive, Bree was showing her new husband around with a plastic cup in her hand. She pointed at my 31 little spruce along the 2-track and said, laughing, "That's Delia. She gardens on other people's property." Everybody laughed. I laughed too. It was a party. Rung 3 was Vernon. Vernon Halloway went on dialysis 6 years ago. Duluth 3 days a week, and Marguerite does not drive on the expressway, and Bree had the babies and Ward had the shop hours he could not move. So it was me. Tuesday and Thursday for 2 years and 2 months, an hour and 40 minutes each way, and I closed my shop those afternoons. Vernon and I did not talk much at first. He was not a talker. By the second winter, he was telling me which block of trees his father had bought as bare root and where the money came from in 1961. He told me things I am fairly sure he never told his own children. The children were something he had to be a certain way in front of. I was just the girl driving. I got to know that waiting room better than my own front porch. Vinyl chairs the color of oatmeal. A machine that took quarters and gave back something the color of weak tea. A television bolted up in the corner, playing the same 4 commercials for 4 hours. I brought work. Over 2 years and 2 months, I put a blind hem in 90 or 100 garments in that room. There is a woman in 2 Harbors who to this day believes I have a very nice studio. Vernon liked to watch me do it. He said his mother used to sew and that he had forgotten the sound of it until he heard my thread pull. One February afternoon, coming home in the dark, with the heater roaring, he told me about the 1979 freeze. It took the whole crop. His father had to choose between the orchard and the 80 acres north of it. He sold the 80 acres to a Lindqvist for less than they were worth because Lindqvist could pay cash in March. Vernon said his father cried in the machine shed, came in for supper, and never mentioned it again for 30 years. Then he said, "That's what land is. It's just the thing you didn't sell." I have thought about that sentence a great deal since. Here is how that got told afterward. At Vernon's 75th standing in the barn, Marguerite said, "We all pitched in when Vern was sick. That's what a family does. We all pitched in." I want to be fair, and being fair is the hardest part of telling this. I do not think she was lying exactly. I think that in her head, the driving genuinely was the family pitching in. I was an extension of Ward, and Ward is family. The credit went where the blood was, and there was nothing left over to hand to me. Her voice when she said it had that pressed, even quality of a hem somebody has ironed flat, so nobody will notice it was let out twice. There was one more thing in that car in the spring before he died. We were coming back from Duluth, and Vernon was tired, and he said out of nowhere, "You know that road's not..." And then we came around the corner, and Marguerite was standing at the end of the drive with the mail, and he stopped, and he never picked it up again. I did not push him. You do not push a man who has been on a machine for 4 hours. Rung 4 is the last one, and it runs straight into everything else. 2 weeks before Vernon died, Gerald Tannen's car was in the Orchard Drive at 9 in the morning. I came up with a casserole because that is what you do, and Marguerite met me at the door and took the dish out of my hands and said, "We're doing family business, honey. Wait in the kitchen." I waited in that kitchen for 50 minutes. I know it was 50 because I watched the clock over the stove, the one shaped like a rooster that has run 3 minutes fast since the day I met these people. I washed the dishes in the sink that were not mine. I wiped a counter that was already clean. I read the front of a church bulletin twice. I could hear the shape of the voices through the wall. Marguerite's going up at the ends, Gerald's flat underneath it. I could not make out one word. At some point, I quit trying and stood there with my hands in water that had gone cold. Vernon died on the 28th of September. 8 days after the funeral, Bree stopped by my shop. She had a coat that did not need anything done to it. She stood there and turned it over twice. Then she told me a developer out of the cities had offered $412,000 for the orchard. 41 lots. This was before probate had even opened. Marguerite had not decided yet, she said, and Ward should not get his hopes up because obviously it's a blood thing, Dee. You get that. And then the last one, and this is the one I need you to hold on to. The Friday before the will reading, Ova Lindqvist came into my shop. Ova has the 80 acres north of the orchard, and he has trucked the Halloway crop out every fall for 22 years. He is about 70. He is not a man who wastes a word, and he stood in my doorway with his cap in his hand. He said, "Delia, the boys want to start hauling a week early on account of the weather. That all right with you for the low spot?" I said it was fine. He said thank you and went out. Ova Lindqvist is the only man in this township who asks before he does a thing. He has hauled apples out of that orchard since before Iris was born, and he has never once put a tire on ground without checking with somebody first. I have always liked that about him. I did not think about it 1 inch further than that. The conference room above Nordvik Hardware has one long table, a window that does not open, and a radiator that ticks. There were 11 of us. Marguerite at the head, because Vernon had named her executor. Bree and her husband. Ward beside me, 2 cousins from Hibbing, an aunt. Gerald Tannen at the far end with the estate file, and Iris who had driven me because my van was in the shop, and who was supposed to wait downstairs and did not get, and who ended up standing in the hallway just outside the door. Gerald read for about 20 minutes. Personal property, the equipment, the equity in the packing shed to Ward, which was real money, and which I want on the record because this is not a story about a family that gave us nothing. The whole thing would go through probate in Kettle County District Court over the winter, with Marguerite as executor and every beneficiary named on the first page. I was not on the first page. I had not expected to be. That is not the part that hurt. Then he got to the land. The orchard and the home place to Bree, subject to a life estate in Marguerite. And then, a clause Vernon had added 14 months before he died, In the spring, I was driving him to Duluth twice a week. Gerald read it with the careful blankness of a man reading a menu in a language he half knows. No interest in the Halloway land shall pass to or vest in any person not of Halloway blood. Nobody moved. The radiator ticked. 14 months before he died. That is the piece I could not get around, sitting in that chair. The spring I was driving him to Duluth twice a week. The spring, he told me about his father and the machine shed. Somewhere in there, somebody had that clause put in. I have decided what I believe about it, and I will tell you, and you can do what you like with it. I do not think Vernon wrote that sentence. I think a woman sat at the end of a hospital bed with a lawyer and a list of, and a tired man signed where the tab was, the way tired men do. He started to tell me something in the car that spring, and never got to the end of it. I am not going to pretend I know which sentence it was. Then Bree said it. She said it lightly, the way people say a thing they have already said in private and found funny. She's a seamstress. Give her the sewing machine. She meant Vernon's mother's treadle machine. A 1921 singer in a walnut cabinet, 30 years under a tarp in that barn. I took it apart, cleaned it, and rebuilt it 3 winters ago. Vernon told me in the car that it was mine. A cousin laughed. Not meanly. That is the thing about a room like that. There is never anybody in it being a villain out loud. There is just a laugh that goes around a table, and you are on the outside of it, and everyone can see exactly where the edge is. I looked at Ward. Hold that room for me a minute. I want you to see it the way I saw it, because this is the moment the whole thing turns, and it is not the moment people think. My husband of 19 years was sitting to my left. He had his hands on the table. He looked at his mother, and he looked at the wood, and he did not say one word. Not, that's my wife. Not, she drove Dad to Duluth for 2 years. Nothing. That is what I mean by rock bottom. It was never Marguerite. Marguerite has been exactly who she is since 2007, and a person cannot be wounded twice by the same weather. It was the man beside me deciding in about 4 seconds that peace at that table was worth more than my name. And out in the hallway, my 16-year-old was hearing all of it. She told me about it in the van afterward, in the flat voice teenagers use when they have decided not to cry in front of you. She said she heard the laugh go around. She said she counted, and it was 7 seconds before anybody spoke again. She stood out there and waited for her father's voice the whole 7 seconds. Then, Marguerite turned in her chair so the whole table could hear. You came with a suitcase, Delia. You can leave with. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, like a woman waiting for a fitting to be over. And then I said, Mr. Tannen, could I see the survey that goes with the legal description? Gerald looked up. He had the polite blank face of a man who has been asked something that is not on his list. He said the legal description was standard. It was the same description that had been on the deed since 1938, 22 acres more or less in the southeast quarter. I said, I understand. I would still like to see the survey. Marguerite made a small sound through her nose and said, What on earth for? I said, because I would like to know where the lines are. I did not cry in the parking lot. I sat in my van with Iris beside me, and I did arithmetic. The treadle machine sits in the corner of my shop, and its cabinet has 3 drawers. The bottom one holds every paid receipt of my working life. My mother did it that way, and I never questioned it. It took me 40 minutes. It was in a rubber band with the receipts from 2015. Kettle County sale of tax-forfeited and surplus land, June 6, 2015. Parcel 09-114-0031. Described as a portion of the abandoned Brant Falls and Northern Spur right-of-way, 2 acres more or less. Sale price, $1,340. Purchaser, Delia Sandoval. Sandoval is my mother's name. It is on my birth certificate, and it is the name on every legal thing I have ever signed, because I never changed it. It never occurred to me to. In 19 years, not one Halloway has ever said that word out loud. I bought that strip because it was the only ground between my sewing room window and the west wind. It was cheap, and the county wanted rid of it. The man at the auction said, anybody else, and nobody else said anything. I planted 31 spruce on it 3 weeks later. Every February since then, my glass has been warm. I did not buy it for leverage. I want to say that plainly because I know how this sounds. For 11 years, I did not think about that parcel as anything but the ground my trees were on. I paid the property tax on it every May. $118 a year, one line on a statement with 4 other lines, and I never once looked at where the rest of it went. The gravel 2-track runs across it. The only road into Halloway Orchard runs across it. Now, if you have ever found out something enormous while standing in your own workroom, holding a piece of paper, you know that it does not feel like triumph. It feels like the floor tilting. My first thought was not I have them. My first thought was this cannot be right, somebody would have said. So I went and found out. It took 11 days, and it did not go the way I expected. I want to walk you through those 11 days because they are the part that matters. Nan Ostrander is the Kettle County surveyor. Her office is in the basement of the courthouse, and it smells like paper and radiator dust. I put my receipt on her counter and asked her to tell me what I owned. She pulled it up and looked at the screen a long time, and then she said, "Well, yes and no." That was a bad morning. Here is what she told me. Old railroad spur parcels are a mess. Some of them were deeded in fee. Some were only easements that snap back to the neighboring land the day the rails come out. And the 1911 plat that described mine was drawn by a man who thought a bend in a creek was a permanent object. Second and worse. If the public has openly used a private track for long enough, a township can end up owning a road it never bought. 50 years of apple trucks is a long time. You may own 2 acres, Nan said. Or you may own 2 acres with a public road through the middle of it, which is the same as owning nothing that matters. I would not tell anybody anything until I know. It cost me a boundary survey I paid for out of the shop account and did not tell Ward about. It took Nan 11 days, and in the middle of them, she had to go up to the township hall in Sandy Lake and go through the road inventory books by hand back to 1948. And while she did that, my telephone rang twice. The first was Gerald Tannen 4 days after the reading. Pleasant, apologetic even. He said the estate would move faster if I signed a short release confirming I claimed no interest in the Halloway property and no claim as a beneficiary against the estate assets. Routine, he said. Every probate attorney does it where there is a spouse by marriage. He would drop it by the shop. If you have ever sat across from a pleasant man who wanted your signature on something you had not read, you know that particular quiet. It is not fear. It is the sound of your own good manners telling you to be agreeable, and it is the most expensive sound in the world. I told him I would want to read it first. He said, "Of course." He sounded surprised. The second call was Ward from the packing shed in a low voice because his mother was 40 feet away. He asked me to just sign thing. He said it was not worth a fight. He said, "It's not like it changes anything, Dee." That was the only time in the whole business I came close to losing my temper, and I did not, and I am still proud of that. Let me say this to every one of you who married into a family instead of being born into one. Being agreeable is not the same as being good, and the people who benefit most from your good manners are almost never the people who love you. You are allowed to read the paper first. You are allowed to take 11 days. The letter from the county surveyor came on a Wednesday. I read it twice, put it in my coat pocket, and went back to work on a wedding dress. Marguerite convened the meeting herself. She set it for 4 in the afternoon on the 11th of December in the cider barn. She wanted witnesses. That is the part I still find remarkable. She wanted a room full of people to watch me sign that so that it would be finished, and everyone would have seen it finished. There were 14 of us in that barn with the propane heater going. Marguerite, Bree and her husband, Ward, Gerald Tannen with his folder, a young man in a good coat from the development company who had driven 2.5 hours and kept checking his phone, 2 of the orchard hands, Iris, who I had told to stay home and who came anyway, and Ova Lindqvist asked because he had hauled for the family 22 years, and Marguerite liked the symmetry of it. She had the release on the cider press with a pen on top of it. She said in front of all of them, "Delia, we'd like to get this behind us." Let me stop the room right there, because this is the part people get wrong about me afterward. I did not drive over there to detonate anything. I had 1 letter in my coat pocket. I had decided on the way over that if that woman said 1 decent word to me, I would sign her paper, and we would work the rest out privately over a winter. She did not say a decent word. She said, "Some of us have been standing here since 3:30. So I asked Gerald Tannen a question instead. I asked him to read out the legal description of the access to the property. He said, "The access." I said, "The road. From County Road 9 up to the barn. Whatever deed or easement it runs under. I would like to hear the description of it." Gerald Tannen went through his folder. Then he went through it again slower. I watched a man in his 60s who has done every closing in this county for 30 years work it out in public. In 108 years, nobody had ever written a deed for that road. Nobody had ever needed to write one against anybody. The young man from the development company stopped looking at his phone. Marguerite said, "It's our road. It's been our road since 1938. And Uwe Lindqvist, who had said nothing at all until that moment, said, "It's not though, Marge." Everybody turned around. Ova said, "I've been asking Delia about that crossing since the year they pulled the spur out. 11 years. Every fall before we haul." He looked genuinely confused. "I figured you all knew." Vern knew. Bree said, "Knew what?" I took the letter out of my coat pocket and gave it to Gerald Tannen. Reading things out loud to that family was his job, and I did not want it to be my voice. Parcel 09-114-0031, Kettle County. 2 acres, more or less, being a portion of the abandoned Brant Falls and Northern Spur right-of-way. Fee title. Conveyed by County Auction Deed, June 6, 2015, recorded that August owner of record, Delia Sandoval. Then, Nan Ostrander's finding in the sentence I have read maybe 40 times since. The parcel was never vacated to the township. The crossing appears on no road inventory from 1948 forward. The county has never maintained it. The 2-track is a private crossing over private ground. And the last line, which is the one that made the young man in the good coat pick up his briefcase, there is no other legal access to the described 22-acre parcel. The barn was very quiet. Somebody's phone buzzed, and they did not take it out. Marguerite said my name. Not Honey, not Ward's wife. I said, "Marguerite, in October you told this whole family I came with a suitcase, and I could leave with one." I said, "You were right. I did come with a suitcase. My mother's shears were in it, and a pincushion, and about $400. Everything else I have I bought." And I said, 2 acres of it is under your road." She sat down on a folding chair. Bree said something to Gerald that I did not catch, and Gerald said, "Bree, I can't advise you. I'm stepping out of this entirely." Then he started packing his folder. He had drafted a release for a woman he now had an obvious conflict with. Gerald Tannen may be a coward at a conference table, but no attorney is a fool about his own license. Here is what came of it laid out flat, because the money part is what makes it real. The development company withdrew inside a week. Not out of sentiment. Their title company would not insure a parcel with no legal access, and no lender funds 41 lots on land you cannot legally drive to. The $412,000 went away, and the appraisal it was built on went with it. Bree's construction loan was withdrawn 11 days after that for a house on a lot she had already picked. The partition deed dividing the orchard could not be recorded as drawn. The abstract company would not certify it without an access exception on the face of it, and on a rural property, an access exception is a scarlet letter. A probate court does not close an estate on a deed like that. That left them one road, and it was a public one. A landlocked owner in Minnesota can petition the township board for a cartway across a neighbor's ground. It is a real proceeding with a real hearing, and it goes in the paper. Marguerite would have had to stand up in the Sandy Lake Town Hall and ask a township to force a road across the land of a woman she had told a room was not family. Nobody in that barn knew what a cartway was on the 11th of December. By Friday, every one of them did. She did not file. On the 14th of January, she drove down and sat at my kitchen table. I am not going to give you the version where I made her beg. She did not apologize. Women of 71 who have run a family since 1974 do not apologize. They arrive, which for her was the same thing and cost her more. I had already had the papers drawn by a lawyer over in Sandy Lake before she came. A permanent easement across my 2 acres, recorded, free not $1, not now, not ever. and I would not take one when Bree offered later. Running with the land, so no Halloway ever has to ask a Rooker or a Sandoval for permission again. With one condition, and only one. The easement is granted for access to a working agricultural orchard. It terminates automatically if the land is ever platted or subdivided for residential development. Marguerite read it twice, which is more than she has ever done me the courtesy of doing with anything else, and she said, "So they can never sell it." I said, "They can sell it to somebody who wants to grow apples." She signed it at my kitchen table with her own pen. What she said out loud for 19 years, she now has on record forever. The land stays Halloway. She just did not get to be the one who arranged it. There is one more piece, and it came out of Ove's mouth in the barn that afternoon, before anybody had absorbed anything. He said, "Well, at least now somebody'll pay her back for that culvert." Nobody knew what he was talking about. Bree actually said, "What culvert?" The low spot. 400 feet up from the county road, where the 2-track dips across the old drainage run and washes out every spring when the frost comes out. It is on my 2 acres. It was always me. Gravel. A rented plate compactor twice. A whole new pipe the spring the north end collapsed. 11 years of small bills out of a shop account because water was running at my trees and I fixed it. 11 years of small bills is not a plan. It is a basting stitch. It holds a thing in place while you decide it, and then one day you look down and it is the only thing holding it. Every truck of Halloway apples that ever went to market went out over a culvert I paid for. Nobody in that family knew it. Neither did I. The spruce are 20 feet now. In February, my sewing room window is warm enough to lean on, which is all I ever wanted out of that ground. The easement is recorded in Book 219 at the courthouse, and the orchard opened as usual in September, and Uva hauled. Marguerite and I are not friends. We are something else that does not have a word to women who both know exactly where the lines are now, which is more than we had before. Ward and I are working on it in a room in the basement of that Lutheran church on Thursdays. I am not going to tell you it is fixed because he still cannot explain those 4 seconds at that table, and I have stopped needing him to explain them. Some things do not get repaired. They get let out and repressed and worn. Iris works Saturdays in the shop now. She is not good at it yet. She pins toward herself, which is how you end up bleeding on a bridesmaid's dress, and I have told her twice and will tell her 40 more times. She asked me in the van that day why I did not tell them for 11 years. I told her the truth, which is that I did not know I had anything to tell. That is the part I would want you to take out of this. If you have ever been told you are not really family, hear this from a woman who spent 19 years being introduced by somebody else's name. You do not have to become somebody's enemy to stop being their furniture. You just have to know what is actually yours and be willing to say it out loud once in a room with the lights on. Go look at your own paper. The deed, the title, the policy, the account with your maiden name still on it. Not because somebody is coming for you, because knowing is the difference between being at a table and being on the menu. If this one found you where you needed it, stay a while. There is another one waiting, and I would rather you hear it from me.